Hello everyone. This is Diane Elkins with Artisan eLearning and eLearningUncovered.com. We're here today to look at how to create a custom interface in Lectora. And there's a lot of things that go on into these decisions. You have everything from technical considerations such as how big is the monitor of the student who's going to be viewing it, or will they be using a mobile device? You've got graphic design considerations such as how does it look? You've got the mood of your training and the tone of your training, and then you also have some branding issues. Who is your organization? What do they need to convey from a marketing perspective? Then you also have your functionality. What features and functions do you need to build into the course? All of those things go into the elements of a good interface design. And then once it's designed, you want to make it, in most cases, recreatable. As you continue with your production, you want to take those design elements and be able to quickly use them over and over again. So that's what we'll be looking at today. And there's a lot to cover in just a short period of time, so we will get started. First, a little bit of background. I am working on Lectora Inspire version X.6, and we're starting with just a blank title. The very first decision I think needs to be made is how big you want your pages to be. And that has to do with what the students are going to be using. And this has become a harder question over time. Back when I started using Lectora in 2005, the safe thing to do was to assume students had a monitor of 800 by 600 resolution, which in today's standards is absolutely archaic, but back then that's what you had to plan for. What you want to shoot for is as much space as you can have without requiring the student to scroll, because scrolling gets old. You can do it every now and then, like we'll often do it on a pre-test or a post-test, or maybe we've got a pop-up page with a glossary. But on a page-to-page basis, you don't want the students to have to scroll a lot. So the more you understand about your audience, the better. Typically, a safe resolution to shoot for is 1024 by 768. And so you want to be at your title level, or if you are using a SCORM or AICC course, you can do it at the assignable, assignable unit level. Here we'll do it right at the title level, and instead of instead of the standard, which is 785 by 600, we're going to assume a 1024 by 768 monitor size. Well, it's also the dimensions of the iPad. Although the new Retina displays are actually bigger, but it's a good resolution still on any iPad. However, you don't get to keep all of those pixels for your course. If that's the size of their monitor, that's from the very top of the monitor to the very bottom of the monitor. You don't get all of that space. So if you're going to be going through a website, for example, launching through an LMS, launching on an intranet, you have to factor in the browser controls. So I've got this blue area on top, I've got my URL, my tabs, I've got the menus. Me personally, I have the favorites bar activated. You can have a student who has other bars activated. You don't really know. But you do need to allow for some of that. If you have a standard configuration, you can actually measure it and find out exactly what it is. But if you're dealing with the public, you don't know if they're using Chrome or Firefox or plugins or such, so you just have to kind of estimate. If you're launching through a learning management system, very often the learning management system has the ability to turn off any of those features in the student's browser, and I always recommend that. You shouldn't need them while you're in the course, and they just make things a little harder to predict. So let me get that out of the way. Oh, go away. So what we'll do is we'll back off. The top to bottom is where you have more. So we're going to put that at about 950. Side by side, there's not much. We'll do it about 750 just to be safe. The key thing you want to do here is test early and often. That doesn't feel right. Width, 950. Height. Why? Oh. Let me try and do it the right way. Yeah, 950 width and 750 high. So I'm not sure why it's looking strange like this. There we go. That's more the proportion I was expecting. Is you want to test it. Put out a page or two. If it's going to go through your LMS, load it to your LMS, go to a computer that's typical to what your users are going to be looking at and try it and make sure things aren't getting cut off, because nothing's more frustrating than having to scroll down half an inch on every slide just to get to your next and back button. And you really don't want to have to make these tweaks after your course is built. It's really easy when you start. It's a whole lot harder after that. The next thing you need to think about is some combination of your graphic design elements as well as what I call the utilities. Things like the next and back button. Do you want a table of contents? Do you need an audio control bar? That sort of thing. And this part of the planning I don't do in Lectora, I do in PowerPoint. And the reason is that if I'm just kind of sketching, it's a little bit quicker to come up with some variations in PowerPoint. And it also lets me send it to my client in PowerPoint format. They can even make some tweaks themselves to it because they own PowerPoint and know it. So it's a little bit quicker that way. So let me pull up PowerPoint and just give you a couple of bad examples first. So here's an example of what not to do. There's so many things wrong with this, I can't even stand it. For one thing, it's ugly. You know, the interface design, the graphic design matters. People put trust and form impressions based on whether it looks nice or it looks ugly. So this is ugly. Secondly, it's not very usable. You know, I have these words next and back. Do I click them? Are they buttons? Are they links? I don't know. I've got this list over here. What is that? I don't know what that is. And I can't even read this text because of all of the graphics behind it that are just unnecessary. Then this is a problem that a lot of organizations have, is they try to overbrand. Their logo is too important in the course. The content should be your star, not your logo. Here's another example of what not to do, where someone tried to be so colorful and so graphic designy that it's just impossible to read, it's ugly, and if you had to look at more than 5 or 6 screens of this, you'd get a headache. And you know, we don't want to do that to our students. As opposed to something more like this. At the end of the day, your interface should not be the star. Your content should be the star. And so you want your interface elements to be useful. You want them to communicate the right tone and the mood. You want them to be professional, but you want them to be kind of streamlined and not overpowering. Okay, so let's look at how to actually put something together. So here's a little something I just got started for us, and this breaks one of the biggest rules that I see companies make, and that's overemphasizing their logo. So if you look at this, we've got a lot going on. We've got the logo, we've got the course title, the slide title, some utilities here, and the next and the back button. We've got so much stuff going on here that we only have about this much room for our content. That's not a lot of space at all. And the other stuff isn't that important. A lot of organizations want to make the e-learning developers use their standard PowerPoint template, which I don't think is a good idea. PowerPoint is a different need. It's a different purpose. And they also want to overbrand. This is kind of mimicked off of a template we got from a client where they literally wanted their logo that big. Well, I like the thought of, if you can't remember where you work, look down at your name tag, and that will remind you where you work. Now remember that your interface elements, that's different from your splash page. Splash page is what I call the first page. It's the title. You know, there you can have the logo really big, and you can have the course title really big, and you can have some fun clock graphics going on for time management to set the mood. And I think the visual design of your first screen is really important. But what we're looking at is not that. It's what's going to be there on every single page. And this is overkill to have all of this stuff. It gets even worse if you have a course that needs a lot of utilities. So now we add a drop-down menu, we add a page counter, we add an audio control toolbar and a progress bar. Well, you know, how is the student going to filter out all of that stuff around the edge and focus on the content? So here's a variation that puts a heavier emphasis on the content. So let's look at some of the things we did. One is, instead of having this great big old logo up here, we have a nice subtle small logo down there. Again, it can be big on the first page, but it doesn't even have to be, but small the rest of the time. Personally, I don't know that you really even need it the whole time, You know, it's really not that important in most cases, but I have yet to find a marketing department that agrees with me. So I've given up that battle. Instead, just assume the logo will be on there, but let's make it small. One of the things you want to do if you're redesigning an interface or you're creating one for the first time is you always want to talk with the marketing department and get them to approve it. I have seen courses shut down because the marketing department came in later and said, oh, that's the wrong shade of blue, we can't go live. Or there are rules about how small the logo can be. There are rules about how much empty space you have around the logo. So make sure you get a copy of your organization's, or in our case it would be our clients' organizations, logo standards, color palette, font choices. All of those things have been figured out, and it's a good idea to just follow those from the very beginning. So that's one of the things we did. The other thing that I did here that's different that I think is helpful is I made a very clear delineation between where's content and where's utilities. On this version, you had content, you had utilities in the content area. Now that might not seem like a big deal, but what it means is that your content you have to leave a buffer. You know, so you have to leave a little bit of space between where your content can start, meaning you're losing more space just because you need that buffer. You can't really have content go all the way down to here. So instead, by delineating these are utilities, you can now put your content all the way down to the bottom. You can use more of that space. The title of the course is much smaller and kind of faded in. You don't want to make it too faded because you may have some students who have slightly impaired vision, so you want enough contrast that it can be read. But just by making it light blue instead of white, we're kind of saying, you know what, this is in the background, it's there if you need it. But even then, you think people are going to forget on slide 12 that the course is on time management? You know, they're not really. So do we even need it? I think you can ask yourself those questions. So think subtlety, think delineation between utility areas and content areas, and remember that your content is king, and so make sure that space is the biggest and the most prominent. When you come to this slide, you know that probably where you need to be looking is your slide title. That's what I want. Here, you don't even know where to be looking. You don't even know what's supposed to be important here. So make it very clear to your student what's important and what's not. Okay, so this will go through several iterations. You know, we'll go back and forth with the client. And I'm not proposing that this is the most exciting interface. You know, if you want to have fun with it because you're doing a theme, a football theme or a fiesta theme, that's great. Again, keeping your interface elements minimal. But let's assume that we've gone back and forth and we've decided that this is the exact right approach. Then it's time to build it in Lectora. And when I'm in Lectora, my interface elements that are going to appear on every screen go not on the page, but on the title level, or if you are doing an AICC course, they're going to be at the AU level. So you don't want to be on a page when you add them, you want to be at the AU level. So I will now be adding a combination of text, graphics, and functional utilities. So if I'm doing something fairly simple, I might be able to just use the drawing tools right here. I can add a rectangle, that's my banner for the top, and I'm going to edit that and make it navy blue or my own color, so I can do, you know, just some simple elements here, adding text, etc. If I want something a little more fancy, again, I'm probably just going to do that in PowerPoint and bring it in. So let's say I want a gradient on that bar that goes across the top. So I'll create my bar, I'll get rid of the outline, and I'll add just a simple gradient. There we go. Right click, save as a picture. Generally when I make graphics in PowerPoint, I'm going to save that as a PNG, which is their default format. So we'll call that a time management banner. Then I can go into Lectora and import that graphic from the desktop. There it is. Click OK or apply, and there it is. Let me go back to doing a better job of fitting there. Okay, so I can add graphics very easily that I create in PowerPoint. So I think the graphics and the text, that's the easy stuff. So let's look at some of the other more interesting kind of utilities, some of the things that are unique to Lectora. So one of the things that we'll want to do is add next and back buttons. For that, we can use the button wizard. And the button wizard either lets you put in a custom text button, so the button can say next and say back, or we can use a button from the clip art selection. I think that's what we'll do here. We've got a blue course. So I'll see if, let's see, we'll use this one. If you press Control, you can select more than one at once. And we'll add those. Now you can get into lots of debates about, well, should they be at the top or should they be at the bottom? And if you get 10 people together, you'll get 5 people who adamantly think one thing and 5 people who adamantly think another. In the end, it doesn't really matter. You could argue both. I could make a very sound argument for both. The key is you don't want to have to scroll to get to them. And they just need to be easy to find. So as long as they're in one of the quarters, people will find it. We don't have to get too fancy. And when you use the button wizard, your next and back are automatically programmed with a go to next page and go to previous page. Otherwise, you'd have to add them manually. But let's look at how to add something manually. Let's say you want your own custom buttons. Again, I go back to PowerPoint. So here I have some buttons that I created. Let me get rid of this. I'll show you how I created those buttons and how you can do the same and bring them into Lectora. So I'm going to start with a circle. And if you press the Shift key down while you do a circle, it's going to keep it in proportion and not become an oval. Then we'll go to my formatting tools. I'll take off the outline and I'll give it a little bit of a bevel. So that's nice. Let me zoom in a little bit here. So that's a nice looking button there in just a few clicks, and then I'm going to add on top of it another shape, which is an arrow. And we'll add an arrow right on top of that. Format, no outline. This I'll make white. I'd probably spend some time getting that just right. I'm just sort of going to eyeball it here. And I will group those two together, make a copy of it, and then on this copy I'll select the arrow, rotate, flip horizontal, and now I've got next and back buttons. That one feels too off center, I can't handle it. Now I'll select each one. I'll just do one of them. Right click, save as picture, go back to my desktop, and we'll call this next. Normal. Normal means that's what's going to happen when the student's not interacting with it at all. It's just sitting there. But I might want to add a nice hover effect. So let me copy and paste another version of it. And what I want to do is make it just a teeny bit lighter for a glow effect. So I'm going to select the circle, go to fill, and just go a little bit lighter. It doesn't have to be an extreme difference. In fact, it's better if it's not an extreme difference. There we go. And now I'm going to right-click that one, save as a picture on my desktop, and we're going to call this one Next Hover. When I go to Lectora, instead of using the button wizard, I'm going to use the Add Button button. And notice that you have a place to enter separate images for normal state. That's what happens when it's just sitting there. Clicked, which I didn't make, is kind of the depression when the student is depressing it. And then mouse over is the hover. So I'm going to import from File, go to my desktop, find my normal image, and then for my mouse over, from File, and that's my hover image. Apply. So there's my button, and let's see how it looks with the hover effect. And there we go. We have a nice hover effect on our button. So it's actually quite easy to create your own buttons in PowerPoint and bring them in and make them look very, very professional and interactive. Okay, we'll delete that for now and stick with what we have. So the next and back buttons are going to be important. The next thing you might want to include is a table of contents. So let's take a look at some of the options here. First, let me point out a big mistake I've just made. I love it when I do this. I just put all of these objects on page 1. And what did I say not to do? I said don't put them on page 1 because the reason is all of that will be gone when you go to page 2. All of these items need to live at the title or the assignable unit level. So I can just drag those up, put them on the assignable unit level, and that means they will be on every page unless I tell them not to be. So that's what I should have done all along. So from here, let's look at the table of contents feature. It's this button right here, and there are 3 ways you can structure these. So let me make a couple of copies, and we'll take a look at all 3 choices. So the first choice is called Tree View. The second choice is called, that I'll show, is called Indented List. And the third choice is drop down. So let's look at this in preview mode to show you the difference. The difference is that the tree view lets the student expand and collapse, which is especially nice if it's a long course because then it's a little easier to find what they need. The indented view, everything is always there. There's no expanding or collapsing. And the drop down list is clearly a drop down list. So I like the drop-down list better because it doesn't take up much room. I can tuck it up here perhaps, and it doesn't have to really overwhelm my interface. We do have one client who likes having this here down the side all the time, and so we do. You could also maybe put this on a home page and add a link to the home page or the menu page or something that they can go back to. You don't have to make it as long as your course is, because if it's shorter, it will just add a scroll bar for the student to be able to scroll around. So those are a couple of options for a table of contents. Realize that these are clickable, so a student can navigate around these. They're not just for informational purposes. So if you don't want the student to click around, like we have a number of clients that we do compliance training for, ethics training, safety training, things like that. And they don't want the student to be jumping around the course. They want them to take it in order, in which case these aren't going to be a good choice. They are clickable. I know some people have tried workarounds where maybe I show this over to the side, but I put a transparent shape over it so they can't click on it. To me, I'm not a fan of that. If you're not going to click on it, then why are we showing it? But you can make that choice. Let me show you a couple of examples of how you can integrate that into your design. If we go back to where we were earlier, here's an example of how we can put some extra elements into the course without it being overwhelming. I mean, of course, the more utilities you put on your course, the less room you're going to have for your content. But sometimes that's what you need. You know, here we have both the navigational menu as well as a transcript panel. This is especially important if you want your course to be more accessible to those without those with disabilities or who don't have speakers on their computer, etc. When I do this sort of thing, I like to keep all of the utilities together as much as possible. So, you know, I've got my menu bar up here, my table of contents, my transcript, my page number, my buttons are all kind of right here in a single panel, which helps, again, delineate from the content. But a way to go even farther would be to use some of the color tools to make it even fade out a little bit more so it's less prominent. You want your content to be king, and so this is one way to do that. And you can do that over here in Lectora. It is on the layout tab or the font and color tab. You can change the background color. I like the eyedropper tool so I can match my color exactly. And then styles, which we'll talk about in a minute. Let me just get something that works. There you go. And then when I'm creating my PowerPoint mockup, I'll just use, I have Jing, which is a free screen capture software. Or if you have Snagit, which is part of Lectora Inspire, you can just do a screen capture of this and paste it in. That's how I got this panel here. That's how I got my audio control toolbars. I just did a screen capture of it in Lectora. So we do have a question, and that's what size do you typically make buttons? I make them as small as I can. That still makes them easy to click. So I can't give you an exact pixel number. for example, let's see, these are 43 by 43. You could go a little smaller than this, but you do need to think about whether or not you're going to be making your course mobile compatible, because you've got to think about whether or not your student's going to be using their finger instead of a mouse. And so this button here, 43 by 33, is probably about as small as I would go if I was going mobile. The other thing that you do if you're going mobile is you might want to put a little bit more room between your buttons so that you don't accidentally do it. Somebody was telling me they were on Amazon recently, and the links for preview this book and buy it now were so close. She accidentally bought a book that she hadn't planned to because she thought she was previewing it, because it was just too close together. So that's one thing you might want to consider again with mobile design. Okay, so those are our table of contents options. So I'll delete these, and I'm going to leave this one here. Here's another mistake that I make all the time. So here's my table of contents. That's great. Let me preview it. Where did it go? Well, you have to think about your layering. And so if I look at my Title Explorer, it's built like an ice cream sundae. So if you're reading the recipe, table of contents goes in the bowl first, and then the button, and then the button, and then the banner goes on top. So my banner is on top of my table of contents. I need my banner to be on the bottom layer, which is the top of the list. It's the first thing that the course puts down. So now I can see my drop-down list. Okay, so now let's look at progress bars and page counters. So first we'll look at progress bars. They're a little bit easier. First of all, I wouldn't recommend doing both. I don't believe you need both a progress bar and a page counter, but I do believe it's a good idea to give the students an idea as to where they are in the course. You know, how much is left. You want to know that when you're watching a movie, you want to know that when you're watching TV, you want to know it when you're in an e-learning course. So one option is the progress bar right here. Now when you add the progress bar, by default the type is custom. We're not going to get into what that is, or timer. What we want is table of contents. And look again, I put it on the page by mistake. Drag it up there. So the progress bar is going to be table of contents. And so what that's going to do is, let me put it down here at the bottom, is it's going to show the student how far along they are. So you can see here I'm that far in, and then with each successive slide that I go to, it's giving me an idea of how far I am progressing. If you have multiple chapters and you add a progress bar to the chapter instead, it will ask you if you want to show the progress for just that chapter. You can customize it a little bit. Under layout, you can make it horizontal or vertical. Instead of using the default image, which is these little green bars, you can instead pick your own color. For example, I'll pick my custom blue. Apply, and there you go. You can show little tick marks which go page by page. So you have a number of options there. More often than not, I'm going to use a page counter. I usually put it between my next and back buttons. It just seems like a nice clean place to put it. And the page counter can be a little tricky if you're not careful, but it's great. It's a great utility. It's very useful. You just have to, make sure that you're using it properly. So I'm going to go to Tools, and then the page numbering tool. So do I want to include the total number of pages in the text? So basically what it's asking, do you just want to say page 4, or do you want to say page 4 of 12? I think you should say of 12, so I'm going to include that. Now I can also type the word page 3 of 12. And if we go back to my interface designs here, let's see. I personally don't think that's necessary, because really page 3 of 12 versus 3 of 12, I think people know what that's going to mean. I don't think anybody would not know what you mean by that. So page just adds more space. So I generally leave that off. I'm not going to put anything there. We'll just leave everything else the same, and then finish. And what it did is it put, see, I keep being on the wrong item when I add these elements. Whatever you have selected when you add the element is where the element will go. So we'll move that in just a minute. So we have this page counter, which has nothing in it. It's because it's fed by actions. So all of these actions, set label, add current, of, total, etc., that's the logic that runs it. If you're not careful, you could later, when you've got lots of stuff going on, you could accidentally look at one of those actions and say, I don't know what that is. So here's what I do, is I take all of my actions that are for my page counter, and watch carefully what I'm going to do. I'm going to drag them to the page counter. So notice right now they are all individual elements, but I'm going to drag them to the page counter. And do you see the difference now? Now they are part of the page counter. So I'm not likely to accidentally delete them because it's part of the page counter. Plus, if I want to inherit or disinherit the page counter, these all go with it. I can hide them. I just think it's cleaner if you do that, and now I can move the whole thing here. So let's look at some of the options for the page counter. What it's going to do is it's going to say, I'm on page 4, current page, of the total number of pages. And Lectora keeps track of the total number of pages. The problem is, in a minute, I'm going to show you how we're going to make this chapter at the bottom for all of our pop-up pages, and I don't want those counted. So you may have to go in manually and change this one. So add total pages. Right now, there are 11, but the last 3 don't count. So when I'm done with the whole course, I don't bother doing this till the end because the number of pages changes so many times. I can go in and say, no, I want this to be 25. And now when you look, it says 1 of 25. So that's how you can manually deal with that if you need to. Okay, let me undo that. If you use the page counter when you're in the a chapter, the wizard gives you some extra choices, like do you want to start over at each chapter? So should the first chapter of page 1 be 1 of 4, or should it be 2 of 12? You'll just have to decide how you want to do that. You can disinherit it from any page if you want to, but there's not a way to say, oh, don't count this in the total. You have to go in and manually do your total of pages. Okay, we have a question to show you how to do the eyedropper again. So let's do it on our page counter. Actually, no, that's not a good example. Let's add a text box. And we'll say that this is the course overview, and we want this color to be the same blue. From the drop-down menu, I select the eyedropper, and then I click on whatever color I want to match. Anything, I could actually, do this color blue if I feel like it. So if I want to match something that's already on the slide, I want to make it the same color as my arrows, I just click on that, and it makes it that color. So that's how you use the eyedropper. So we've got page counters, we've got next and back buttons, we've got table of contents. So the last of the utilities I want to show you is the menu feature. And back on our mock-up, that's this home, help, exit. So you have to decide what features you want, of course. That decision should be made first. And then I'm going to use the menu tool, add menu. And this is a big one, so let me expand this out so we can see the whole thing. So what I want to do is the menu name here is the name of the whole menu. So we'll just call it menu. And now we want to add the individual items. So the first item will be home. And then for each item here, you have an action panel. So we'll want to go to the first page in the title. I like to add separators between them, so we'll add a separator, just a little line. I'll add a new item, and let's call this resources. What I often do when I do resources is I'll have a pop-up page that it goes to, and that pop-up page gives descriptions of all the resources. But what if they're pretty straightforward? I can even have a sub-menu right here. So with this one selected, I'm not going to use an action. Instead, I'm going to add a sub-item, which makes this then a drop-down menu. Notice if I go back to resources now, my action is gone because I've said make it a drop-down menu. So the first item, let's say we're going to have a glossary. And so my action would be to go to that page. It doesn't exist, so I can't set up the action. And then if I want another item, I don't add a sub-item because that would be an item under glossary. So this can be a little confusing at first. So with glossary selected, if I do add item, it puts it at the same level as glossary. So that's, oh, I know. So here's my other one, and we'll call that reference guide. We'll spell it right. We'll really spell it right. And then that action would be perhaps to launch a program or a document. Okay, I don't have such a document, so we'll just go back to none. So now I want to go back to the main level. So I'll click on resources, which is at the main level, and say add another separator, add another item. We'll call this one exit, and we will make this exit title. Now we have a number of layout options. I won't get into all of them, but do you want it horizontal or vertical? All sorts of color choices, so lots of options there that you can play around with. So we will add that. Here's what it looks like. Put it over here maybe. I'd probably match it with the blue background and give it white text so that it blends in a little bit more. And then we'll take a look. So I can click home. Resources becomes a drop-down menu, and then exit. So that's how you use the menu feature, which is really nice because you set up pretty much any action you want. So that's most of your utilities. Let's stop and let me take a look at some of the questions. Okay, there's a lot of them. Let's see where I left off. Okay, we've got a question. Will the progress bar work when you have a lot of branching in your course? No, and neither will page numbers. If you're going to, it depends upon how the branching works. For example, simple branching you might be able to work. We seem to be doing a lot of time and attendance program training, new systems for time and attendance, and very often there's a separate module just for supervisors. So there I would set up page numbering per module, and at the end of the first module, which is for everyone, that was set up 1 of 10, etc., 9 of 10, 10 of 10, and then there's a button where you either say I'm not a supervisor and you go to the end, or yes, I'm a supervisor, you go to the next module, which is a new 1 of 9, 2 of 9, 3 of 9. So there, if it's module-based branching, you would just do module-based numbering. But with complex branching, you don't know how many slides a person's going to get potentially, or maybe you do, but you may have to do it manually. For example, if I have a customer service scenario and everybody's going to get 4 questions, but they're slightly different, well, I can still manually number 1 of 4, 2 of 4, 3 of 4, and do it manually. But you can't do it automatically, and a progress bar will be very confusing. Is the page counter 508 compliant? Yes, it is. It's basically just reading variables, and anytime you read a variable, that is 508 compliant. And so they will be able to access that information through a screen reader. What's a good method for adding hover text? I'm not exactly sure what that's referring to, but let's say I wanted to have a little hover over here, like a little tooltip that says this is next or back. I probably wouldn't even make it hover. If I feel like it's unclear, I would probably just add, and here I am on page 1 again. I keep doing that today. I might just call it next and just put it right under there to always be present. I don't know that I would make it hover personally. Okay, and then let's see. Example of how to import Flypaper or Camtasia into the project. Unfortunately, that's going to be out of scope of this project since we're focusing more on how to design an interface, but I know there are some other courses in the Inspiration Wednesday archives that can probably answer that question well. We've got some questions about how to create a custom panel of colors, which we'll get through in just a minute. Do you need to add an exit to your content? Can you just close it in the browser window? I like to always put an exit for 2 reasons. Number one, some people don't understand that all you have to do is close the browser. If there's no exit button, it freaks them out, so it just makes it a little more user-friendly. The other thing is that with with learning management systems, it's better if they exit the course properly with the formal exit course or exit title action. So it's just kind of a cleaner way to do that. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about how to save this as a template when we're finished. And I think I'm going to have to move on. Wow, we've got tons of questions. I'm going to do the best I can to answer those when we're finished. But I want to make sure I get through the key teaching points first, and then we'll go back to the Q&A, okay? So we've got the basic elements of our structure and our utilities. So let's talk a little bit then about page design. I personally don't do a lot of here's my template for this page layout and here's that page layout. I like to be a little bit more flexible than that, but there are certain things that you do want to do for consistency and for saving time. So when I do my interface design, in addition to the interface, I also look at some design standards. For example, I might put together something like this, where I pick up to three fonts, one for a heading, one for body copy, and one for maybe an accent that's a little bit more fun. I pick some treatments such as colors. If I'm going to use a shape, here's the gradient, and if I'm going to use a picture, here are the two effects that I'm going to use. So it's kind of like if you've ever gone to an interior designer, or if you've ever been at a hotel where they have that poster board in the lobby saying this is what our new hotel is going to look like, and it has these little swatches. You know, here's a little scrap of this fabric and here's a little scrap of that fabric. That's kind of what I'm creating here, is these are the design standards I'm going to use. And if you put something like this together, here's what I recommend you use. Where is it? Here we go. One is the 3-font rule. Generally, you don't ever want to use more than 3 fonts in something. Unless you're a trained professional, do not try this at home. You want something that's a little bit heavy for a heading. You want something that's very simple, usually a sans serif, meaning it doesn't have the little pointy edges at the end for your text. Very, very simple on your text. And then if you want to have something a little bit funky here and there for an accent used very sparingly, you can. If you'd like more information on the 3-font rule, we just wrote a blog 1 or 2 weeks ago on our site, which is elearninguncovered.com, that explains the 3-font rule and some other tips for working with fonts. And then also the 3-color rule. You don't need to use every color under the sun. It will be more professional and less work for you if you just pick with 3 colors and stay with them. One should be light enough that you can put dark text on it. One should be darker, that you can put white text on, and then an accent color for a little bit of fun, and that you don't have to worry about whether white or dark text works on it. So 3 colors can give you what you want. Once you've made those decisions, there's some things you can do in Lectora to make it easier for you. One is to set up a custom color palette. So let me add a text box, or let me just add a shape here to get us started. Going to edit that. So wherever you are on a fill color, whether it's to fill a shape, whether it's your text, any color menu, you can go to custom. When you're in this, you can enter in your RGB values, or you can use the eyedropper. Normally, if you're working with a corporate color palette, you'd have the RGB values. So let's say we're looking at 50, 50, and 255 for our blue. Then I can click Add to Custom Colors. And so what that means is anytime, anywhere I'm on the color menu and I go to Custom, there's my blue. I don't have to I don't have to redo it over and over again. Similarly, you can do that with texts via text styles, which is this menu right up here. I think I have to be on a text box for it to work. There you go. I have a lot of them already set up. I've got a couple of different clients that have different needs, so that's why I have so many. So what you can do is, just like you can in Word, is you can set up styles. So for example, I'll have a new one, and we'll call this RQM heading. So anytime I have something big, important, I want it to be Arial rounded, bold, 16 point, with this wonderful color I just mixed, and that's called RQM heading. And there it is. Notice you can import and export styles, so if you're working on a team, you can share those. So I will select that for this, and here is my heading. So that way you can apply that style throughout the course without having to remember what font and what style you're working with. So those are a few ways to do that. Another thing I'm going to do, so those are general. In general, these are the colors I'm going to work with. In general, these are the fonts I'm going to work with. You always want to decide that. But then there's also certain page types you're always going to want. For example, I put a few things together here in Chapter 2. For example, perhaps on each module, you're going to want to have some sort of module title. Let me get rid of some of the stuff that I put on the interface. So let's say that this here is going to be my module title. So once I design that, I can use it over and over again. So I'll want to save that page probably as a library object. Now, normally I do a prototype for our clients so that we like the design, we know it works on their computers and with their LMS, and then once we have that prototype, we build the course. That's generally when I make my library objects, is after the prototype is approved. And what I do is I go through and I strip out specific content. So I make a copy of my file and I strip it out because I don't want to save the library object saying module 2 setting priorities, because what if I forget to come back and change it? So I'll do module number XXX, and I always use XXX. That way when I'm done with the course I can do a global search for XXX and remember and find out if I forgot to change anything. I also, before I save it as a library object, I like to name everything really well. So this will be my bottom clocks. If you're going to use it over and over again, you might as well have it right the first time. Top clocks. This was 508. Obviously, I'd want to do some alt text and put them in the right order. Now, when you save a library object, you can make it just about anything. So for example, if I wanted to save the whole page, including the page itself, I would click here. But if I just wanted to save the elements that go on a page, I could do that. If I wanted to just save the clocks, I could do that. So you can do everything from an individual object to a couple of objects to a full page to several pages to a chapter. You can make it as big as you want. So here I want the whole page. I'll go to Tools, Library Object, save the current selection as a library object. We'll call this module title 2. Then later, I'm in chapter 1. I don't have a module title, so I will go to Tools, Library Object, Insert, module title 2, and there it is. So huge time saver there. So what might you want to make? A title page, maybe an objectives page, maybe a closing or a summary page. Like we use this style all the time, where you roll your mouse over each objective to get a summary. So I could save this page as a library object as well. Then the other thing I will almost always do is I will create a place for pop-up pages at the end of my course. So I'll put a chapter at the very end. We'll call it pop-up pages. And this will be for anything that needs to pop up. The answer to a question, the definition to a word, more information. And so there's a couple of things I'll want to do on these pop-up pages. One is I want to make sure that the student can't navigate to this. So on the very last page of my course, I need to make sure that I disinherit the next button. I usually just do that at the end because what the next page is may vary. Here I'd have to disinherit the word next also, because we don't want the student to go from the last page next to your pop-up pages. So that's one thing I'll do. The next thing that I'll want to do is I want to make it, I don't want all the interface elements. These are pop-up pages. I don't need my logo and my next and back. In fact, I don't want them. It would be confusing. So I'm going to inherit no objects from my parent. Back on the General tab, I don't want to include this in the table of contents. And I also want to make it a little bit smaller. I think students should know they're in a pop-up window. And if it's the same size as the course, they may not realize they're in a pop-up window and that the course is still there. So instead of the default, I'll just make it about 200 pixels smaller for now. You can decide how big you want it to be, even if it's just 10 pixels each way. There we go. We have a smaller page that's a blank canvas. And then each pop-up page is like that. I can put certain things that are going to be on every page. For example, I might want a close button. I'm going to put that down on the end. And then each individual page, I can still go in and make this one bigger or smaller. Let's say I just need a little definition. I don't need something this big. We're going to say it's going to be 300 by 200. Okay, but notice what that did. It made it so that my close button is gone. So let me undo that and show you how to fix that. By default, objects are measured from this corner, how far over, how far down, when you go to the Position and Size tab. 708 over, 510 down. Instead, check these two boxes here, which is measuring it from the bottom corner. So it's 42 up and 42 over and 39 up. So now look at what happens if page 2 needs to be little. It's going to measure from the bottom corner, so it will still be there. So that's a nice handy trick to do. And then if I have certain types of pop-up pages, I can make a chapter or a section in this. For example, let's say that we have lots of bright ideas throughout the course, and so we'll have a whole section just for bright ideas. I have a graphic that I found that's going to be on all of those pages, so that's going to go at the section level. We'll add a text box that says bright ideas, and we will apply our text style heading to it. Probably I'd make that bigger. I won't worry about it being exact, but because those things live at the section level, it means that any page I add to that section will automatically have those elements on it. Okay? Now this whole thing, I've done my interface, I have a couple of sample pages, and I can save the individual pages as library objects, but the other thing I want to do is just save the whole thing. One of your options on the File menu is to save a title as a template. That's not what I use. The reason I don't use that is because that only saves your title level properties. It's only going to save your interface elements, but I want to save my pop-up chapters and my summary slide and my module slide and all of that structure. So I'm just going to do a straight save, or maybe I'll export it to a zip that we put on the shared drive. You just have to remember that every time you open it, you have to do a save as to make your ethics course, and then open it again and do a save as to make your time management course so you don't corrupt your regular one. And that way everything will be saved. Okay, so those are some of the major elements for creating your interface, both in terms of usability, technical considerations such as size, graphic design, and branding, and then how to set yourself up for good usability or reusability using text styles, using your color palette, using library objects, and then saving your whole course. So we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to go through the rest of the questions and answer as many as I'm able to in the next few minutes. What's the biggest screen size that can be used for a Lectora title? I have absolutely no idea. I have never pushed that window. I know I've made some very tall screens, like a glossary that just scrolls and scrolls. Molly, if maybe you know the answer to that, you can chime in. I think the bigger question is, what's the biggest screen size that you should use? And again, unless you're specifically going for scrolling, you want to make it something that's going to fit on most people's computers. Let's see, the next question. Can you build a template that imports HTML? I'm afraid I don't understand that question, what you're looking to do. You can insert an external HTML object, and that's part of any course, so you can build that into any course like you would any other feature. Do you normally name your pages with something besides 1, 2, 3, 4? Definitely. Normally not for my template, but yes, if this was on juggling priorities, I would name it that, especially if you're going to be using a drop-down menu. So I want to do that for me because it's going to be easier for me to design the course, but then also that's what the student is going to see in your table of contents. So you definitely want to change that in a real course. Good question. You guys have good questions. Okay, why do you save to a file when bringing into PowerPoint and not just copy? That's a great question also, and I did actually with this light bulb. It's just a matter of, there's two issues. One is fidelity and one is file size. So sometime, and the other is, do you want it saved externally just for other uses? So if I save it as a PNG, a graphics file, then I have it for other purposes as well. Let me just try a straight copy and paste. Let me get out of edit mode. And where did it did not? Oh, well, I think because it's grouped, it's not going to copy. There we go. Yes, it is. And you know what? The fidelity is pretty good. However, it's not transparent. When I saved it as a graphic, it was transparent, so I could have put it on a slightly colored background. So that's generally why I save it as an image first. Transparency, and usually it's just a cleaner image. With things like this graphic, the light bulb, I just did a copy paste. Generally, when you paste an object into Lectora like this, it saves it as a bitmap, which is one of your largest file sizes. So you don't ever want to do that. Instead, I can go to Edit, Paste As, and it will let you pick it. Sometimes you don't have a lot of choices. Lectora has to decide what it's able to accomplish. Just remember, bitmap equals bad. It's huge. It's 10, 50 times bigger than some of the other formats. So I can try bringing it as a GIF, and it looks like I lost a little quality that way. I probably would try it again as a JPEG. Okay, great questions, great questions. How can you change the default font on your site? Great question. At either your title level or your AU level, if you go to the background tab, you can pick one of your styles as your default. So you'd have to set up the style first, and then select it here from this menu. And by default, that means the minute you hit text box, what is that going to be formatted for? And so that's what it will be for the whole course. Again, that's either at the title level or the AU level on the background tab. What's your default text style? Okay, we have someone asking, what are your thoughts on video menu options? If you can maybe chime back in, I'm not quite sure what that's referring to, so if you can maybe elaborate, I'll see if I can get to that question. Okay, so the next question is, the pages in the pop-up chapters behave differently in that when I leave such a page, I go back to where I was. That has to do with the fact that it's a pop-up window. And one thing that might help is if I showed you how to make them, but for those of you who may be newer to Lectora, you don't know how to get to them now. How do you make them pop up? So let's just go to a page, and we will add a button. Let's see, I know what we'll do. We will add a little icon. So we've got some content on this page. We have this little icon that we've trained the student to know means, hey, click this button to get a bright idea. So I'll add an action to that. On mouse click, go to a specific chapter, section, or page, and then I'm going to pick Bright Ideas number 1, and I want to open it in a new window. That's the key. If you want it to be a pop-up, you have to open it in a new window. Apply. So now when I click this guy, there it is. There's my pop-up window. And so it comes back to the other page because it's a pop-up window. So the underlying course doesn't change. You go back to where you were. That's just how the pop-up windows function because it's a separate window. Okay. Okay, next question. Will this webinar be available for future viewing? Yes, it will. They tell me that sometime next week it should be up. And can I share the PowerPoint with you? I believe yes. I will probably have to strip out a few things, graphics that I don't have license to distribute to other people. I'm going to have to work with Molly there at Lectora to see if there's a way to get that out to everybody, but we will work on it. Let's see, is there a way to save your custom color panel so that you can use it in other courses? My initial thought is I don't think so, but let's just run through a quick test and see. So we will go to the menu from File. Oops, sorry. We want to edit. Hello. Let's try this again. Edit. Custom. I'm not seeing that as an option, so I don't believe that is available. So you would need to write down your RGB equivalents, and then each user would need to set that up. Okay, it looks like I have time for one more question. Oh, yes, I struggle with the same one. Is there a way when you create a custom color to not overwrite the one that's in the first square? So here's what that means. If I go to custom, oops, if I go to custom, remember I added this blue. So now we also want that really light yellow color. Add to custom color. Look what it did. It just overwrote it. You have to think of it first. Okay, so if before I mix my color, I click on this, get my blue, add to custom color, it'll overwrite that one. Or if I want a blank one, but you've got to click it first. Mix your color. Now we want a nice subtle green, add to custom colors. So that's how you would get around overwriting the same one over and over again. Okay, well it is 2:30, so that is 1 hour of jam-packed content on how to work with interface designs and reusability. And if I could leave you with just one thought, just remember that content is king and impressions are everything. You don't want ugly, you don't want your interface to overwhelm your content. You want a nice balance where your content is primary, your utilities are available and easy to use but not overpowering. Have fun making some new designs.